Your father was a hero. Right, kid. And I'm the commander-in-chief. The officers' laughter echoed through the government building. Staff members snickered behind their desks. And there sat a small boy, fingers wrapped tightly around his father's dog tag, saying nothing in his defense. No tears, no argument, just silence as he shouldered a burden that would have crushed most grown men. Then the heavy oak doors swung wide. A decorated colonel entered and raised his hand in perfect salute to the child. In that moment, everyone in that small town learned a lesson they should have known from the start. True honor doesn't need to announce itself. It stands in quiet dignity. If you believe some names deserve unquestioning respect, stay with me. This story will forever change how you view what it means to show reverence. Welcome to Heart Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness unfold. Let's discover what truly happened that day. Dawn painted Millbrook in gentle amber light. As Eleanor Pierce pushed open the weathered door of her bakery, warm aromas of fresh bread and cinnamon swirled into the street, blending with the crisp autumn breeze. Autumn had always been her cherished season, a time of harvest, gratitude, and contemplative moments. Eleanor straightened her flour-dusted apron and glanced at the order sheet pinned beside the register. Today's delivery: 24 apple pastries for the municipal building's Friday meeting. A routine task, or so she believed. She packaged each box with care, securing them with handmade twine bows, as was her tradition. Old-fashioned, some called it. Eleanor simply smiled at such remarks. Certain things were better preserved in their original form: respect, kindness, remembering those who came before. She loaded the packages into her aging Ford and headed downtown. The streets buzzed with morning activity, parents shepherding children, seniors chatting over steaming mugs, workers hurrying through the post office doors. Millbrook wasn't large, but it pulsed with its own unhurried rhythm of life. As she parked near the municipal building, Eleanor immediately noticed them. A young woman, perhaps 30, with exhausted eyes and a second-hand jacket, standing awkwardly by the entrance steps. Beside her stood a small boy. He couldn't have been older than 9, perhaps small for his age, but there was something uncommonly serious in his demeanor that made Eleanor pause. The child wore jeans with patches at the knees, worn sneakers, and an oversized military cap perched determinedly on his head. He clutched its brim with one hand as the wind tugged at it, as though holding something precious. Eleanor observed as the woman, surely his mother, approached the entrance, purse gripped tightly. The boy hesitated, glancing up at the imposing stone structure with a kind of weary reverence before following. Eleanor lingered longer than intended, feeling something tug at her heart. Then she gathered her pastry boxes and followed them inside. The municipal building hummed louder than usual. Phones trilled, staff members hurried back and forth. The scent of aged paper and floor polish hung in the air. Eleanor placed her deliveries in the staff room, exchanged pleasantries, then drifted toward the front lobby, drawn once more to the sight of the boy. He and his mother waited at the counter for assistance. The receptionist barely looked up. "Take a seat. Someone will call you." Eleanor noticed how the mother's shoulders tensed. She guided her son to a hard plastic bench against the wall. They sat close together like sparrows bracing against coming rain. The boy pulled his cap lower and withdrew something from his jacket. A worn dog tag hanging from a fraying cord. His fingers traced over it repeatedly, as if the indented letters were sacred paths he was compelled to follow. Eleanor's heart constricted. She recognized that gesture. She'd seen it in war widows, clinging to the final tangible remnants of someone taken too soon. She was about to turn away when Officer Daniels entered the lobby. Daniels was the type of man whose presence filled a room without effort, or perhaps deliberately, broad, imposing, boisterous. He wore his badge like a trophy rather than a responsibility. Eleanor had never warmed to him. He spotted the boy almost immediately and, true to character, couldn't resist approaching. "Well, look what we have here, a little soldier," Daniels announced, striding over. The boy stiffened, but remained silent. "What have you got there, son?" Daniels pointed at the dog tag with a smirk. The boy looked up, his expression calm yet proud. "It belonged to my dad," he said simply. "He was a soldier, a real hero." The words hung in the air, honest and unashamed. Daniels barked a laugh. "A hero, huh? Sure he was. Bet he drove tanks and fought dragons too." Several clerks chuckled under their breath. The boy's knuckles whitened around the dog tag. But he didn't flinch. He simply looked down again, his thumb resuming its path across the engraved letters. Eleanor felt something twist inside her. This wasn't merely cruelty, it was ignorance and worse. A refusal to even consider that a quiet boy with a battered cap might be speaking truth. She wanted to intervene, to say something, but her throat constricted. She was just the baker, the listener. Instead, she remained where she stood, a silent witness to the injustice unfolding. The mother, Helen, Eleanor later learned, placed a protective hand on her son's shoulder, jaw tight. She didn't argue, didn't explain. She simply leaned down and whispered something in the boy's ear. Whatever she said made him sit straighter. The old cap slipped slightly, but he didn't adjust it. He just maintained his grip on that dog tag as if it anchored him in rough waters. Eleanor saw it clearly then, something many in the room missed. The boy wasn't pretending. He wasn't spinning tales. He was carrying something too weighty for his small hands, a legacy. As Eleanor watched, the boy's gaze lifted, not toward Daniels or the laughing clerks, but beyond them to a framed American flag on the wall. In that moment, Eleanor understood. This wasn't merely a child missing his father. This was a boy trying, in his own quiet way, to honor a man the world had already begun to forget, and heaven help them all if they allowed that to happen. The lobby clock ticked loudly in the silence, following Daniel's mockery. Eleanor stood near the vending machine, pretending to browse snacks, though her eyes never left the boy. Evan Taylor sat rigid beside his mother, one hand clutching the dog tag, the other resting in his lap. His oversized army cap tilted forward slightly, casting shadows across his face. He didn't adjust it. He simply stared at the floor as if willing himself invisible. No one spoke. The clerks returned to their keyboards. The receptionist tapped her pen impatiently. Only Eleanor, unnoticed in her corner, truly observed. She noticed how Helen Taylor kept her hand firmly against her son's back, a silent reassurance. She saw how the boy's small chest rose and fell in measured, deliberate breaths, like a soldier standing at attention under fire. Eleanor's heart ached. She wanted to cross the room, kneel before him, and whisper that he wasn't alone, that somewhere in this town, someone still remembered what true sacrifice meant. But her legs remained frozen, and then someone else moved. The janitor, an elderly man with a slight limp and thinning gray hair, pushed a mop across the scuffed tile floor. No one noticed him. He had become invisible the way older men sometimes do in communities that value shiny novelty over quiet service. But Eleanor saw him. She noticed how he paused, leaning heavily on his mop handle, how his gaze sharpened when he heard the boy's name, Taylor. The janitor straightened, carefully setting his mop against the wall. He fumbled in his pocket for something, an outdated flip phone. Eleanor's heart quickened. His movements carried purpose. He stepped outside, slipping quietly through the lobby doors. No one noticed. No one except Eleanor. She watched the door swing closed behind him, a faint whisper of cold air following, and something deep inside her stirred. Hope, small and fragile, yet real. Inside, Officer Daniels sauntered back toward the front desk, joking with another officer about kids these days and their fantasy hero dads. Eleanor clenched her fists inside her apron pockets. Her stomach twisted in a helpless knot. She couldn't erase from her mind the image of the boy's hunched shoulders, the way he clutched that tag as if it were simultaneously his anchor, armor, and shield. Minutes stretched endlessly. The clock ticked. Helen Taylor completed her paperwork, her handwriting trembling slightly. The receptionist called another name. Someone else rose and walked past them. Life continued indifferent. Eleanor looked at Evan again. The boy wasn't crying, wasn't pleading. He simply waited, quiet, composed, bearing a weight too heavy for his small frame. And somewhere beyond those walls, an old man with a limp was dialing a number from memory. The phone rang once, twice. Someone answered. Eleanor couldn't hear the conversation, but she could envision it. A gravelly voice urgently explaining about a boy, a name, disrespect witnessed, and on the other end, someone listening, someone remembering. 10 more minutes passed. Eleanor shifted her weight, wondering if she should approach, perhaps offer Helen coffee from the lounge, maybe slip a cinnamon roll into Evan's hand. Before she could decide, a sound cut through the room, not loud, just precise enough to slice through the apathy. The heavy oak doors of the municipal building swung open, bringing a rush of cold air. Footsteps on tile, measured, deliberate. Everyone turned. Eleanor caught her breath. A man stood framed in the doorway, backlit by sunlight. Not just any man, a soldier in full-dress uniform, medals gleaming against deep blue fabric, silver eagles adorning each shoulder, a colonel's insignia. He didn't stride in like Daniels, didn't bark commands or demand attention. He moved with quiet authority that filled the space without noise. Eleanor watched, her heart pounding. The colonel's gaze swept the lobby, passing over Daniels, over the clerks, over watching citizens, until it found Evan and held. Without hesitation, the colonel moved forward, boots clicking crisply on the floor, directly toward the boy. Every breath in the room seemed suspended. Evan looked up, eyes wide with uncertainty. The colonel halted precisely 3 feet from him. Eleanor saw it, the slight tremble in Evan's small fingers tightening around the dog tag. For a long, weighted moment, no one moved. Then in one fluid motion, the colonel raised his hand to his forehead and rendered the boy a perfect, formal military salute. The room froze. Even the fluorescent light seemed to hum more softly. Eleanor pressed a hand to her mouth, feeling tears burn her eyes. Evan stared up at the man, unsure. Slowly, hesitantly, he stood, his battered cap tilting precariously as he rose. Eleanor noticed how the colonel's eyes softened at the sight. There was no mockery here, no pity, only respect. Deep, unshakable respect. The colonel spoke. "Young man," he said, voice steady yet carrying something deeper, something like reverence. "I knew your father, Sergeant First Class Daniel Taylor. He wasn't just a hero. He was the reason many of us made it home." Silence, absolute. You could hear paper falling somewhere in the back office. Evan's mouth moved, but no sound emerged. His mother, Helen, covered her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. Officer Daniel shifted uncomfortably, color draining from his face. Eleanor witnessed it all and saw how, at the center of it, stood a boy in a worn cap holding a simple dog tag, finally being seen for who he truly was. A son, a legacy, a quiet kind of hero. For a breathless moment, no one in the lobby moved. The colonel's hand descended from his salute slowly, almost ceremonially. He adjusted his stance, polished boots clicking softly against the floor. Eleanor remained motionless, her heart hammering against her ribs. This moment, so simple, so silent, carried more weight than any speech she had ever heard. Evan, small yet brave, gazed up at the towering figure. The boy's face, partially hidden beneath the old cap, held an expression Eleanor couldn't name. Something between awe and desperate hope. The colonel's voice broke the silence, low but commanding. "Your father," he said, each word carefully measured, "was not just a soldier. He was a standard, a compass for men like me when the world turned dark." Eleanor felt a ripple move through the room. The clerks, the officers, even Officer Daniels. Everyone stood perfectly still. No more snickering, no more whispers, only listening. The colonel crouched slightly, bringing himself closer to Evan's height without sacrificing an ounce of dignity. He reached inside his jacket and withdrew a small folded photograph. With deliberate reverence, he unfolded it and placed it gently into Evan's trembling hands. The photo was aged, its edges worn, colors faded by time. It showed a group of young soldiers in full combat gear, standing proud yet exhausted in some dusty, distant place. At the center, standing slightly apart, was a man, A man whose smile was subtle but steady, whose eyes seemed to look beyond the present moment. Eleanor didn't need anyone to tell her. This was Evan's father, Sergeant First Class Daniel Taylor. "Do you see him?" the colonel asked softly. Evan nodded, unable to speak. That man carried 50 pounds of gear, a radio, and 2 wounded soldiers out of an ambush in Helmand Province. He took a bullet to the shoulder but refused evacuation until every last one of us was safe. The colonel's voice caught slightly, but he steadied it. He taught us how to lead when fear clawed at your throat, how to stand when your knees threatened to buckle, how to move forward when the world crumbled behind you. Eleanor saw how Evan's small hands tightened around the photo, how Helen's tears flowed unchecked down her cheeks. And for the first time since entering the building, Eleanor witnessed something shift within the boy, a tiny flickering light. The colonel stood, turning slowly to face the room. His voice, though never raised, filled every corner. Sergeant First Class Daniel Taylor wasn't just a name on a roster. He was the reason half my men ever returned home. He turned slightly, fixing Officer Daniels with a gaze so sharp it sliced through the man's bravado like a blade. "You mock his son," the colonel said, not shouting, yet somehow making the words resonate in the air. "But you owe your freedom to laugh to men like him." Daniels flushed deep crimson. He opened his mouth to respond but found no words. "Good," Eleanor thought fiercely. "Let him feel it. Let him finally understand." The colonel's expression softened as he turned back to Evan. He knelt once more, his voice dropping lower, more personal. "I was just a frightened lieutenant back then," he said. "Your dad carried me when my strength failed." He smiled, genuine, touched with sadness. "I wear these medals because of him, because when it mattered most, your father didn't consider his own life. He thought about all of us." Evan's lip trembled. Eleanor felt her own vision blur. Throughout the lobby, a slow, powerful transformation began to ripple. One by one, officers and clerks stood straighter. One by one, heads lowered in shame or lifted in respect. Even the receptionist, who had barely acknowledged the boy earlier, now wiped her eyes with her sleeve. Officer Daniels, face pale and drawn, dropped his gaze to the floor. No words were necessary. Truth had found its voice, speaking through a child, a cap, a dog tag, and a man who remembered. Finally, the colonel rose and extended his hand to Evan again. "Young man," he said, "you carry more honor in your small hand than most men will carry in their entire lives." Evan, blinking back tears, took the colonel's hand in his own trembling one. In that handshake, in that simple human connection, a bridge formed between past and future, between a father's sacrifice and a son's enduring legacy. Eleanor felt tears flow freely down her cheeks now. Unashamed. This was why she baked extra loaves on Veterans Day. This was why she still tied her boxes with twine. Because some things, the good things, deserve to be remembered, deserve to be carried forward. Outside the wide glass doors, Eleanor glimpsed the old janitor standing quietly, leaning on his mop, watching. He didn't smile, didn't nod. He simply stood a little straighter, like the former soldier he once was. And for Eleanor Pierce, for everyone present, something fundamental had shifted that day. Not loud, not flashy, just right. The lobby remained suspended in silence so profound, Eleanor could hear the faint hum of heating vents overhead. It was as if time itself had paused, allowing honor to reclaim its rightful place. Eleanor dabbed at her eyes with her apron corner, trying to remain inconspicuous. The boy with the old cap, the soldier with medals on his chest, and the silence that now filled the hall. It was all too powerful, too sacred to disturb. Then a door creaked open at the far end of the building. All heads turned. Out stepped a tall man in a dark uniform. Not a police officer, but someone different. His stride was measured, deliberate. There was a gravity to him that drew everyone's attention. Captain Thomas Bennett, chief of the Millbrook Police Department. Eleanor had met him once years ago when she provided baked goods for the department's Thanksgiving gathering. She remembered his firm handshake, his quiet dignity. Now, Captain Bennett's expression was carved from stone. He carried no clipboard, no files, only his authority and something Eleanor recognized immediately: purpose. The captain walked directly toward the small gathering. Helen, Evan, Colonel Monroe, surrounded by silent witnesses. He stopped in front of Evan. The boy looked up, eyes wide beneath the shadow of his battered cap. Captain Bennett knelt down, a man of position, a man of years, bringing himself to the boy's eye level. He extended his hand. "Evan Taylor," he said, his voice steady but carrying underlying emotion. "I'm Captain Bennett, and I would be honored if you would visit our police academy next month." The lobby stirred slightly. Eleanor held her breath. Captain Bennett continued, "I want you to address our new recruits, to show them what it means to stand tall when someone tries to diminish you." Helen gasped softly, one hand over her heart. Evan, stunned, could barely nod. The captain smiled, small but sincere, and added, "Your father shaped warriors on the battlefield. Today you've shaped this room." He stood, turning to address everyone present. His voice strengthened. "Let me be clear. In this department, we honor service. We honor sacrifice. Regardless of what uniform you wore or how small your shoulders might be." His gaze shifted to Officer Daniels, who stood rigid, face flushed with shame. "And we especially honor the children who carry that legacy forward." Murmurs of agreement spread through the room. One by one, officers straightened their posture. One by one, civilians transformed from passive observers to witnesses of something greater than themselves. Eleanor wiped another tear from her cheek. The captain wasn't finished. He turned back to Helen and Evan. "I've reviewed your husband's service record," he said, nodding respectfully toward Colonel Monroe. "And I've spoken with those who knew him." He looked Evan directly in the eye. "Your father's memory deserves more than a forgotten file. Starting today, our precinct will dedicate a place of honor in our main hall." He paused, allowing his words to settle. "It will bear his name, and every officer who passes it will remember the price of their freedom." The weight of that promise descended over the room like a warm, invisible mantle. Eleanor saw Helen's shoulders shake with silent sobs. She saw Evan, too young to fully comprehend the magnitude of the moment, clutching his father's dog tag more tightly. And she saw, most significantly, something blooming quietly within the boy. A reaffirmation, a deep-rooted understanding. He wasn't merely carrying his father's memory anymore. He was becoming part of it. Captain Bennett gave a final nod, then turned to Officer Daniels. His tone shifted, cool, commanding. "Officer Daniels, my office, now." Daniels paled visibly but obeyed without protest, trudging toward the hallway like a man walking into a storm of his own creation. The door clicked shut behind them. The colonel placed his hand lightly on Evan's shoulder. "You did well today, son," he said. Evan looked up at him, and for the first time since entering the municipal building, the boy smiled. It was small, it was tentative, but it was genuine. Eleanor exhaled slowly, her chest aching with the sheer beauty of what she had witnessed. A boy, mocked and doubted, had stood taller than men twice his size, had reminded a town, perhaps even himself, that respect wasn't something demanded. It was something carried. As the lobby began to stir back to life, quiet conversations, nods, handshakes, Eleanor turned toward the door. She paused, watching Evan one last time. The boy still held his father's dog tag, still wore that battered old cap sitting slightly askew on his head. But now he wore something else too, a quiet, unshakable pride. 2 weeks later, a cold breeze swept across a millbrook as townspeople gathered outside the police station. The sun hung low, filtering through thin clouds and pale golden rays. Eleanor Pierce carried a tray of freshly baked cinnamon rolls as she approached the crowd. She had baked throughout the night, an offering not for profit or recognition, but because today mattered. Today they would unveil the memorial, a quiet space inside the police department dedicated to a man whose name had once been mocked within those walls and now would be permanently etched into them. The lobby appeared transformed. Fresh paint adorned the walls. A new plaque gleamed under recessed lighting mounted at the far end of the entrance hall. Above it, the American flag hung proudly. Eleanor made her way through the gathering crowd of officers, townspeople, and several veterans in uniform. At the front stood Helen Taylor, her face pale but composed. Beside her stood Evan, wearing his father's army cap, polished shoes, and a simple white shirt carefully tucked into dark trousers. The dog tag still hung proudly from his neck. The mayor approached the podium first, offering words about service, sacrifice, and community. The police chief followed, speaking of lessons learned. Eleanor listened, but her eyes never left Evan. The boy stood tall, diminutive, among the adults surrounding him, yet somehow larger than them all. He clutched a folded flag presented to him earlier by Captain Bennett himself, holding it against his chest with both hands. Eleanor felt her throat constrict. This child, she thought, was carrying more than any child should ever have to bear. Yet he shouldered it with a grace most grown men could never achieve. Finally, Captain Bennett stepped forward again. He spoke without notes. He didn't need them. 2 weeks ago, he began, his voice steady. A child reminded us what true courage looks like. The room fell completely silent. Evan Taylor showed us that honor doesn't come from the loudest voice in the room. It comes from quiet hands that hold on to memories, even when no one else believes. Eleanor swallowed hard against the rising lump in her throat. She wasn't alone. Officers stood more rigidly. Civilians wiped at their eyes. Even the mayor shifted his weight, blinking rapidly. Captain Bennett turned toward Evan. And so today, he said, we dedicate this space not just to Sergeant First Class Daniel Taylor, but to every quiet hero who walks among us. He gestured toward the plaque, still covered with a velvet cloth. Eleanor held her breath. With a small nod from Captain Bennett, Evan stepped forward, hands trembling slightly but determined. He reached up and pulled away the cloth. The crowd collectively exhaled. There, gleaming under the lights, was a bronze plaque etched with precise care. Sergeant First Class Daniel Taylor. He taught men to lead. He taught leaders to serve. Beneath the inscription hung a glass case containing his original dog tag, polished but still bearing the marks of time. A photograph, the same one Colonel Monroe had placed in Evan's hands, and beside them, a folded American flag. Simple, elegant, unforgettable. A hush lingered as people moved forward slowly, reverently. Some saluted, some touched the glass lightly with trembling fingers. Eleanor watched Evan closely. He stood silently before the display, his father's cap shadowing his eyes, his small shoulders squared against the weight of the moment. Helen joined him, one hand resting on his back. Colonel Monroe stood on his other side, his chest adorned with medals, but his eyes filled with something even rarer: gratitude. Eleanor approached, setting her tray of cinnamon rolls on a side table no one had yet touched. She overheard Evan glancing up at the plaque. Then, in a voice just loud enough for those nearby to hear, he whispered, "My dad wasn't loud." He didn't need to be. Eleanor felt her knees nearly buckle. Those simple words, so small, so profound, rippled through the room like a pebble dropped into still water. Captain Bennett cleared his throat, visibly moved. He stood beside Evan, placing a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "Millbrook won't forget him, son," he said quietly. "And we won't forget you either." Around the room, heads nodded in agreement. The ceremony gradually shifted into conversations, quiet, respectful. Yet Eleanor remained motionless for a long while. She stood watching the boy in the battered cap who had changed them all. Outside, the flag above the station fluttered gently in the wind. Inside, a boy named Evan Taylor stood before a plaque that would outlast everyone present. A small hand holding fast to memory, a legacy made visible, a silent promise that some names would never again be questioned or forgotten. Seasons changed, and with them Millbrook's rhythm shifted. Leaves blazed into fiery reds and golds before surrendering to winter's quiet hush. Spring emerged in tender greens, promising renewal. And summer, lazy and golden, blanketed the town in warmth. But some things remained constant. Every year on Veterans Day, Eleanor Pierce rose before dawn and prepared a special batch of cinnamon rolls, an old ritual she maintained without fail. And every year at precisely 10 o'clock, she walked to the police station carrying the warm tray in both hands. Inside the lobby, the memorial still gleamed. The bronze plaque honoring Sergeant First Class Daniel Taylor stood silently beneath the American flag. The glass case below it was meticulously polished. An empty chair had been placed beside it, not for sitting, but for remembering. On the back of that chair hung a simple replica of Daniel Taylor's dog tag, freshly polished each year, engraved with a few quiet words, "For the ones who taught us how to stand." Eleanor always paused before the memorial. She would place the cinnamon rolls on the side table, bow her head and whisper a small prayer of gratitude. And without fail, she would see him, Evan, year after year. At first, still a small boy, awkward in his pressed shirt and polished shoes, standing solemn and serious before his father's name. Then he grew. The cap became smaller on his head. The dog tag rested heavier against a chest that broadened with each passing year. Eleanor observed it all silently, proudly. On his 16th birthday, Evan made a decision that surprised no one who truly knew him. He enlisted in the Army Junior ROTC program at the local high school. Eleanor remembered seeing him at the autumn parade that year, marching at the front of his squad, straight-backed, eyes forward, wearing his father's cap one final time before exchanging it for his own uniform. He wasn't the loudest or the fastest, but he was steady, unshakable. The kind of young man you might not notice first, but once you did, you never forgot. Helen Taylor remained his constant foundation through every practice, every ceremony, every challenge. She stood beside him, quiet, strong, proud. And Colonel Monroe, he became something like family. On weekends, they could often be found at the old VFW hall, bent over maps or history books, the older man teaching the younger not merely how to march, but how to lead. One summer, as Evan prepared to leave for Army basic training, the police station held a small gathering. Nothing elaborate, just officers and townspeople who remembered. Eleanor brought extra cinnamon rolls that day, stacked high in baskets. When Evan arrived in a crisp uniform, too new to feel comfortable, the lobby erupted in applause. Not because he was the biggest or boldest, but because he had become everything his father once was and everything the town hoped he would be. Captain Bennett shook his hand with genuine respect. Colonel Monroe clapped him on the back, murmuring words Eleanor couldn't hear, but didn't need to. Helen embraced him fiercely, whispering through her tears. And Eleanor, she stood quietly near the memorial, her heart swelling with pride. When Evan approached her, blushing slightly, she smiled and pressed a small package into his hands. Wrapped carefully inside was his father's original dog tag, polished one last time. "This belongs with you now?" she said softly. Evan's hands trembled as he unwrapped it. He said little, just nodded once firmly and slipped the dog tag around his neck, underneath his new uniform. Where it belonged, where it always had. Later that day, as the sun descended and the crowd thinned, Eleanor remained behind. She watched as Evan paused before the plaque one final time. The boy who had once clutched a battered cap and an old tag now stood tall in a uniform of his own. He saluted the plaque sharply, precisely. Then he whispered, almost too softly for anyone to hear, "I'll make you proud, Dad. I promise." And Eleanor knew he already had. The door closed behind him as he walked into the wider world. A quiet march forward, not seeking glory, not demanding recognition, just carrying a legacy. One step, one breath, one silent salute at a time. In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way. Often in the quietest places, not everyone who helps seeks recognition. Some just need to know that today someone isn't going hungry. And sometimes that alone is enough to transform a life. You may forget this story, but if no one retells it, history remains silent forever. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe for more powerful stories that remind us what truly matters.